Hi there, this is Michael Jackman. I'm a poet and I'm a senior lecturer in writing at Indiana University Southeast. I'm going to be talking about how meter helps create meaning in a free verse poem. In this case, a lovely poem called Song by Jane Kenyon. Song is a simple 10-line poem, and as I said, it's written in free verse. So let's have a listen. Song. An oriole sings from the hedge, and in the hotel kitchen the chef sweetens cream for pastries. Far off, lightning and thunder agree to join us for a few days here in the valley. How lucky we are to be holding hands on a porch in the country, but even this is not the joy that trembles under every leaf and tongue. It's a gorgeous poem, and one thing that struck me about this the first time I read it was how the idyllic scene seems to give way in the end to something that is missing. The joy that trembles under every leaf and tongue is not there. So where is it? So we have a turn, and it's a beautiful turn. What I want to emphasize here is that the turn, the feeling, and the emotions, it's not just in the words themselves, but it's in the music of the free verse poem. Music in a free verse poem can be talked about in many ways, including the relationships between sounds and words. But today I want to talk about the meter, the embedded rhythms that are inside a free verse poem. Because what's so important for free verse poets to realize is that free verse isn't free, as I like to say. And you can find in many free verse writings some of the uses of meter that occur in formal poetry. So free verse is not just a random kind of rhythm. So my point here that I'm going to be talking about is that in this poem Song by Jane Kenyon, there's a tension. And the tension is created between triple meter and duple meter, or a meter that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and a meter that goes either 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 1, 2. Now this might get a little bit complicated, but it's a wonderful review if you have known a little bit about scansion, and it's a good introduction if you didn't. So not only is there tension, but this meter tension is part of the poem's meaning. There's a pattern that we can see where the triple meters in the opening change to duple meters at the end. And in a way that underscores the meaning, because this idealistic waltz, this waltz of idealism, gives way to a clashing two-beat which signals the unrest in the meaning of the poem. So, just as a review, a refresher for poets, or in case that you're not familiar with these terms, a few terms we need to know to understand how we're going to do this, analyze this meter. First of all, I'll be doing some scansion. Scansion is the interpretation and transcription of a poem's meter, meaning you find these rhythms that repeat, you interpret where they are, and that you do some kind of notation to show where they are. So what's meter? Meter in English poetry, in all languages that have stressed syllables like English does, we have a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. A pattern means it repeats and you could recognize it. So for instance, if I say the word Indiana, we can hear that one of those syllables is louder or longer or something different than the others that has more stress laid upon it. So Indiana. So as an example of a formal poem where meter is not just subtle in the poem, but actually part of the pattern of its creation, I have picked a couple of lines, the first two lines from a lovely poem, Acquainted with the Night, by Robert Frost. I'll read it. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. Now, when we analyze the poem with scansion, you can see that it is built upon a pulse, and it looks like this. I'm going to read it exaggerated and not the way that I just read it before. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. Meter's not an exact science, but we can see that underlying the performance that I gave before, there is this pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables, known as an iambic pattern. As a matter of fact, there's 5 of those pairs per line, which makes this a poem in iambic pentameter. Now, I used bold to show where the stressed syllables are in the pattern, and I used a vertical line to show the amount of stresses in each pattern. So we have pairs of 2 here. But we have some additional notation. So we can use a slash mark to represent a stressed syllable, and we can use an X to represent an unstressed syllable. And here's how the same 2 lines of Robert Frost's poem Acquainted with the Night would look with the stresses added in the notation. Notice the pattern. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. And now we've revealed the underlying pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables. Okay, so there's some names for these things, and they're good for you to know. The 3 that we're going to be talking about today have 3 different patterns. An unstressed followed by a stressed syllable is called an iamb, and it has the rhythm 1-2, 1-2. A stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable is called a trochee, and it has the rhythm 1-2, 1-2. And a waltz-like beat that has a stressed followed by 2 unstressed syllables is called a dactyl. So you would see 1-2-3, 1-2-3. Okay, there's 2 more terms that we need to know too in order to analyze this poem correctly. End stop. An end stop line in poetry is where a line break occurs at a natural pause, where you might take a breath or simply stop. There could be a punctuation mark, such as a period, a comma, a semicolon, or a colon, or it could be unpunctuated, but the spot where a clause would naturally end. Enjambment is where a line break occurs at a non-pause, or you say that the line continues over the line into the next line. So from the Jane Kenyon poem Song, here are some examples. An oriole sings from the hedge. That's a natural pause. You can see that the word and, which is a coordinated conjunction, follows. An oriole sings from the hedge, and in the hotel kitchen the chef sweetens cream for pastries. Kitchen is an enjambed line because that's not a natural clause boundary or pause. Pastries is an end-stop line. It's easy to see because there's a punctuation there. And finally, the last example, far off, lightning and thunder agree to join us. So I've read across the line, and that agree is an enjambed line ending because we have to go across. There's no natural pause there. Poets use this in order to create emphasis at the end of the line and in order to create periods that are stressed or unstressed in terms of emotion. So what you might call tension and release. Tension is created when we cross the line in an enjambment, and release is created when we stop. Or you might say there's suspense and resolution, are 2 other ways to think about it. Suspense occurs through enjambment, and resolution occurs when there's a stop. Okay, so here's an example of the patterns that are in Jane Kenyon's poem. Take line 1, for example. An oriole sings from the hedge. There are 2 dactyls in that line, 2 uses of a 3-beat. An oriole sings from the hedge. In line 3, there's an example of 2 trochees next to each other, or 2 beats, duple meter. The chef sweetens cream for pastries. In line 9, we also have a metered line, but it's a little bit different. It's an iamb. Is not the joy that trembles. In other words, it's the opposite emphasis. It starts with an unstressed syllable rather than a stressed syllable. And finally, in what might seem a little controversial to some people, but since it is free verse, My technique is to read across the enjambment to see what patterns are being continued. So this line, far off, lightning and thunder agree to join us for a few days. That agree to join us, those are two trochees that occur, but one starts at the top of the line and then it finishes on the next line. So what we see in Jane Kenyon are lots of dactyls, trochees, and iambs. Now, so what would be the question? Don't all poems have rhythm? Yes. Might all free verse poems then have some pairs of meter, by accident possibly? And the answer might be yes. But in this case, we see that in this poem, those things are crucial to the effect of the turn at the end. And I'll show you how. Let me read through it and you can see. So I've used different colors. The 3 beats are in red, the 2 beats are in green, and the iambic 2 beats are in yet another color. And watch what happens. An oriole sings from the hedge, and in the hotel kitchen the chef sweetens cream for pastries. Far off, lightning and thunder agree to join us for a few days. Here in the valley, how lucky we are to be holding hands on a porch in the country. Now, up until now, we have a rather idyllic scene. Country begins the turn, or I should say ends the first part of the poem. Country, period, is what's known as a caesura, a pause in the middle of the line, a clear signal that something is going to change. Idealism, lots of waltz-like 3 beats, ba 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 ba, and the contrast is with the trochees. But look what happens as we close the poem. But even this is not the joy that trembles under every leaf and tongue. Suddenly, the turn changes meter completely. We no longer have any of the 3 beats. We have a different kind of 2 beats, the standard iambic lines that can be considered very serious and very grave in the English language. So this bit of tension, this bit of unrest, this bit of yearning after something that is not there in this beautiful scene where there's a country storm, there's creamy, sweet pastries, there's a valley, there's a couple holding hands on a porch, and yet, what is it that's missing? As you can see, the what is it that's missing is signaled not just by the meaning of the words as they turn, but by the underlying meter, the underlying rhythm of the poem. This lesson is incredibly useful for free verse poets because we see how traditional techniques can be manipulated to increase the musical effect of a poem and to increase the tone, the energy, and the effect of the meaning in different parts. Thank you for listening. This is Michael Jackman. I hope you enjoyed this podcast.